My name is Stella, and I'm 34 years old. I thought I had married into the perfect family until everything shattered in one horrific moment. 5 wonderful years. With my husband James couldn't prepare me for what his mother would do. That family dinner changed everything when my mother-in-law Diana called me a parasite and threw scalding hot soup on me. What happened next transformed my marriage, my family relationships, and most importantly, myself. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself in toxic relationships. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago. My parents worked incredibly hard to provide for me and my younger sister. Dad was a high school teacher and Mum managed a local bookstore. They instilled in me the value of hard work and independence from an early age. Unlike some of my friends whose parents paid for their college education, I worked 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a full scholarship. It wasn't easy, but it taught me resilience and self-reliance. After graduating with a marketing degree, I landed an entry-level position at Robertson Media, a mid-sized advertising agency. Through dedication and natural talent, I worked my way up to become one of their youngest marketing executives by the time I was 29. My career was thriving, but my love life wasn't quite as successful. A series of dead-end relationships left me focusing primarily on my career. That all changed when I met James at a charity gala our company was sponsoring. He was representing his family's investment firm, which was considering becoming a major client. The moment he walked into the room, I noticed him, tall with kind eyes and a genuine smile that stood out in a sea of practiced business expressions. Our conversation flowed easily as we discovered shared interests in travel, classic films, and community service. I felt an immediate connection, but hesitated to pursue anything given our professional relationship. James, however, was more direct. He asked for my number, making it clear his interest was personal, not professional. "I know there might be some professional boundaries here," he said, "but I'd really like to get to know you better outside of work." Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. James was different from other men I'd dated. Attentive, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. He listened when I spoke and remembered small details about my likes and dislikes. 3 hours passed in what felt like minutes. As we continued dating, I learned more about James's background. He was the only son of Diana and George Thompson, a wealthy couple who had built their fortune through a combination of smart investments and George's technology patents. James had grown up with privilege, but was surprisingly down to earth and humble. The first hint of trouble came 3 months into our relationship, when James suggested we have dinner with his parents. I was nervous, but excited to meet the people who had raised such a wonderful man. Diana Thompson was an elegant woman in her late 50s, with perfectly styled grey blonde hair and an impeccable home. She greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So you're the marketing girl James has been talking about," she said, looking me up and down. I pictured someone different. Throughout that dinner, Diana asked probing questions about my family, my career, and my intentions with her son. Each question came with subtle implications that I wasn't quite good enough for the Thompson family. When I mentioned my parents' occupations, she responded with, "How quaint. It must have been challenging growing up with such limited resources." James seemed oblivious to his mother's subtle digs. When I mentioned it on the drive home, he laughed it off. "That's just how Mom is with everyone. She's protective of me. She'll warm up to you, I promise." Despite my reservations about Diana, my relationship with James flourished. A year later, he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. It was perfect. A private moment on the beach at sunset with a vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother. In my happiness, I pushed aside my concerns about his mother, believing that love would be enough to overcome any family tensions. The wedding planning quickly became a battleground. Diana had opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, even my dress. When I selected a sleek modern gown, Diana showed up at my final fitting with an elaborate traditional dress she thought would be more appropriate for a Thompson bride. My mother, typically non-confrontational, finally stepped in. "Stella should wear whatever makes her feel beautiful on her wedding day," she said firmly. Diana reluctantly backed down, but the incident set the tone for our future relationship. Our wedding day was beautiful, despite Diana's attempts to control every aspect. James looked at me with such love as we exchanged vows that I thought nothing could come between us. At the reception, Diana gave a speech that on the surface sounded loving, but contained subtle barbs about hoping I would grow into the role of being a Thompson wife. The first year of marriage was mostly blissful. James and I settled into a lovely apartment in the city, and I continued advancing in my career while he took on more responsibility at his family's firm. We established our own traditions and routines, creating a life that was uniquely ours. I made consistent efforts to build a relationship with Diana, inviting her to lunch, sending thoughtful gifts, and always remembering special occasions. My attempts were met with lukewarm responses. She would accept invitations, but spend our time together, making subtle criticisms about my home, my cooking, or my clothing choices. "These curtains are an interesting choice," she would say, running her fingers along the fabric with a slight grimace. Or, "This recipe is almost right, but let me show you how to make it properly." James continued to dismiss my concerns. "She's just trying to help," he would say. "That's how she shows love." The interference escalated when Diana began showing up at our apartment unannounced. She would bring groceries claiming she was worried we weren't eating properly, or she would rearrange our furniture because the flow of the room wasn't working. Each intrusion felt like a statement that I wasn't capable of creating a proper home for her son. As my frustration grew, so did the distance between James and me when it came to the topic of his mother. It became the one subject we couldn't discuss without tension. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake, if love alone wasn't enough to sustain a marriage with such complicated family dynamics. After our first anniversary, James began suggesting we move closer to his parents. His father had experienced some minor health issues, and James wanted to be nearby. While I understood his concern, I was hesitant to live in such close proximity to Diana. Eventually, I agreed, and we purchased a beautiful Tudor-style home just 15 minutes from his parents. The day we moved in, Diana arrived with a housewarming gift, a set of keys to our new home. "These are for emergencies," she explained, though the look in her eyes suggested she had other intentions. It didn't take long for those emergencies to materialize. I would come home from work to find Diana had been there, new curtains hung in the living room, my carefully arranged kitchen cabinets reorganized to her liking, or a casserole in the refrigerator because she knew I would be too tired to cook after a long day at the office. Each time I brought up these invasions to James, he minimized my concerns. "Mom's just trying to make our lives easier," he would say. "You work so hard and she wants to help." Meanwhile, my career continued to flourish. I was promoted to Senior Marketing Director, overseeing our agency's largest accounts. The promotion came with a significant salary increase that put my earnings on par with James's. While he celebrated my success, Diana's reaction was notably less enthusiastic. "I suppose it's good you're so focused on your career," she said during a family dinner shortly after my promotion. "Though I wonder if all those long hours are good for your marriage. James needs attention too, you know." Her comments became increasingly pointed, especially around the topic of children. At every family gathering, Diana would find a way to mention how wonderful motherhood was and how she had sacrificed her career without hesitation when James was born. "The biological clock waits for no woman," she would say, looking pointedly at me. "Some things are more important than corner offices and fancy titles." What Diana didn't know was that James and I had been trying to conceive for over a year without success. We had recently begun preliminary fertility testing, a private struggle we weren't ready to share with family. Her comments cut deeper than she could know. Sunday dinners at the Thompson house became a weekly source of anxiety. Diana would spend the evening making backhanded compliments about my appearance, my cooking when I brought dishes to share, and especially my career choices. Each comment was crafted to sound complimentary on the surface, while delivering a subtle criticism. "That blouse is so bold. I could never pull off something so attention-seeking at my age," she would say. Or, "It's admirable how you manage to throw together these quick meals despite your busy schedule. I always preferred to cook everything from scratch for my family." James existed in a strange middle ground, occasionally recognizing his mother's behavior, but never directly addressing it. He would squeeze my hand under the table when Diana said something particularly cutting, a silent acknowledgement that fell far short of the defense I needed. During this time, I formed a friendship with Rachel, a colleague who had experienced similar in-law challenges. She became my sounding board and reality check when I began to question whether I was overreacting to Diana's behavior. "You're not crazy," Rachel assured me after I described a particularly tense Sunday dinner. "What she's doing is classic passive-aggressive behavior. You need to set some boundaries before this gets worse." Taking Rachel's advice, I attempted to establish some gentle boundaries. I suggested alternate weekends for family dinners instead of every Sunday. I asked James to request that his mother call before coming over. I tried to have direct, polite conversations with Diana about some of her more intrusive behaviors. These attempts at boundary setting backfired spectacularly. Diana immediately positioned herself as the victim, telling James that I was trying to come between them and destroy their family bond. She cried to other family members that I was controlling and isolating her son. Many in James's extended family took Diana's side, viewing me as the outsider causing problems in their previously harmonious family. Only James's cousin Megan and his uncle Robert seemed to see through Diana's manipulation, having experienced similar treatment when Megan married Robert's son. During this escalating tension, James and I received devastating news. After completing fertility testing, we learnt that due to a condition with my fallopian tubes, natural conception would be extremely difficult. The doctor presented options like IVF or adoption, but the news was crushing, especially given Diana's constant remarks about grandchildren. When James compassionately suggested we take a break from family dinners to process our grief, Diana showed up at our door the next day, demanding to know why we were suddenly too busy for family. In an emotional moment, James revealed our fertility challenges, hoping his mother would show some compassion. Her response was shocking. Well, perhaps if Stella hadn't waited so long focusing on her career instead of starting a family, you wouldn't be in this position, she said. There are plenty of young, fertile women who would have been happy to give you children. James finally stood up to his mother, asking her to leave. It was the first time he had directly confronted her behaviour, and it left an uncomfortable tension that lingered for weeks. Instead of apologising, Diana acted as if nothing had happened the next time we saw her, a tactic I would later learn was common among people with narcissistic tendencies. Throughout these struggles, James's father George remained largely on the sidelines. A kind but passive man, he clearly recognised his wife's inappropriate behaviour, but rarely intervened. Occasionally, he would pull me aside to offer a quiet word of encouragement or a sympathetic smile, but he never directly challenged Diana. As tensions continued to escalate, Rachel became increasingly concerned about my mental health. You need to decide what you're willing to tolerate, she told me. This isn't just about Diana anymore. It's about James not standing up for you and your marriage. She was right, but I wasn't ready to deliver an ultimatum. I loved James deeply, and despite our challenges, I believed we could find a way forward. Little did I know that the situation was about to reach a breaking point that would force all of us to confront the toxic dynamics that had been festering for years. The invitation arrived in an elegant cream envelope, with gold embossing Diana and George's 40th wedding anniversary celebration. Despite our strained relationship, I was determined to make the evening special for James's parents. 40 years of marriage was a remarkable achievement, and I wanted to honour it appropriately. I spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, eventually finding a beautiful vintage photo album, similar to one Diana had mentioned losing years ago. I filled it with family photos I'd collected from James, his cousins, and even some of George's old colleagues. I included space for new memories and wrote a heartfelt message expressing my admiration for their lasting commitment. For the evening, I chose a classic navy blue dress that was elegant without being flashy. I wanted to look appropriate for the celebration without giving Diana any reason to criticize my appearance. James noticed my extra efforts and expressed his appreciation. "This means a lot to me, Stella," he said as we drove to his parents' home. "I know things haven't been easy with Mum, but I'm grateful you're trying so hard for this special occasion." When we arrived, the house was beautifully decorated with anniversary banners, flowers, and photos from throughout Diana and George's marriage. Extended family members and close friends were already mingling, champagne glasses in hand. Diana greeted us at the door, stunning in a silver evening gown. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw me, her eyes quickly assessing my appearance. "Stella, that dress is suitable," though I did mention the colour scheme was silver and white for photos. James jumped in before I could respond. "Mom, Stella looks beautiful, and no one cares about colour coordination except you." Diana's lips tightened, but she quickly composed herself as other guests approached to congratulate her. Throughout the cocktail hour, I made an effort to engage with James's relatives, many of whom I only saw at family gatherings. Most were polite, if somewhat reserved, clearly aware of the tension between Diana and me. When it came time for dinner, I discovered Diana had seated James and me at different tables. He at the family table near his parents, me relegated to a table with distant acquaintances. James noticed immediately and insisted on rearranging the place cards so we could sit together, earning a tight smile from his mother. "I just thought Stella might be more comfortable with people closer to her age," Diana explained sweetly to the confused guests. But of course, if you insist on changing the careful arrangements I spent hours planning. The meal began with George offering a heartfelt toast to his wife of 40 years. It was touching to see the genuine love between them, despite Diana's challenging personality. Course after course of Diana's carefully planned menu was served, each dish more elaborate than the last. As the main course of beef tenderloin was being cleared, Diana stood to make an announcement. Before dessert, we'd like to invite anyone who wishes to share a memory or toast to come forward. Several family members and friends offered lovely stories and congratulations. When it was our turn, James spoke eloquently about admiring his parents' partnership throughout his childhood. I presented our gift explaining the effort that had gone into collecting the photographs and my admiration for their lasting commitment. Diana opened the album with a tight smile. "How thoughtful," she said flatly. "Though I do wish you'd consulted me about which photos to include. Some of these are rather unflattering." I maintained my composure, focusing on George's genuine appreciation as he flipped through the pages with tears in his eyes. "This is wonderful, Stella. Thank you for putting this together." As servers brought out bowls of French onion soup as a pre-dessert course, Diana directed the conversation toward family traditions and legacies. "There's nothing more important than family continuity," she said, looking pointedly at me. "George and I have been blessed to see our values and traditions carried forward." Her brother asked innocently if James and I had plans to start a family, soon unaware of our fertility challenges. Before James could answer diplomatically, Diana interjected. "Well, we've been waiting quite some time," she said with a dramatic sigh. "But Stella's been so focused on her career advancement. Some women just have different priorities than family." The table fell uncomfortably silent. I felt my cheeks burning as every eye turned toward me. James reached for my hand under the table, but I could see he was struggling with how to respond. In that moment, something broke inside me. After years of enduring Diana's subtle jabs and passive-aggressive comments, I decided I would no longer hide our private struggle to protect her feelings. "Actually," I said clearly, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "James and I have been trying to have a child for over 2 years. We recently learned that I have a medical condition that makes it difficult to conceive naturally. We're exploring options like IVF and adoption, but it's been a heartbreaking journey for both of us." The table fell completely silent. Some guests looked down at their plates in embarrassment, while others watched Diana for her reaction. George reached across the table to pat my hand sympathetically. Diana's face cycled through several emotions before settling on indignation. "Well," she said sharply, "perhaps if you had started trying earlier instead of climbing the corporate ladder, you wouldn't be facing these issues. There's a reason women traditionally had children in their 20s. James finally found his voice. "Mum, that's completely inappropriate and hurtful," Diana continued as if he hadn't spoken. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. If James had married someone more family-oriented, someone who understood the importance of the Thompson legacy." "That's enough," George said firmly, surprising everyone. Diana's face flushed with anger as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. She stood abruptly, reaching for the tureen of hot soup in front of her. "You come into this family," she said, her voice rising, "taking advantage of our connections for your career, living in a house we helped pay for, and then you can't even fulfill the most basic duty of giving my son children." Before anyone could react, Diana lifted the soup tureen and stepped toward me. "Parasite? Didn't your parents raise you properly?" she screamed, and then deliberately poured the steaming hot soup directly onto my lap. The pain was immediate and shocking. The hot liquid soaked through my dress onto my thighs and stomach. I screamed, jumping up as the scalding soup burned my skin. Chaos erupted around the table, guests gasping chairs, scraping back James shouting his mother's name in disbelief. Through tears of pain and humiliation, I saw the satisfied look on Diana's face before she quickly rearranged her features into an expression of mock concern. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed theatrically. "What a terrible accident." But everyone had seen what happened. There was no mistaking the deliberate nature of her actions. As James rushed to help me, pressing napkins against my soaked dress, I saw George's face transform with a rage I'd never witnessed in my typically gentle father-in-law. "Diana," he thundered, "what have you done?" The room fell silent except for my soft sobs of pain. Even Diana seemed shocked by her husband's tone. James led me quickly to the bathroom, where he helped me out of the scalding wet dress and into a robe. Red welts were already forming across my thighs and stomach. "We need to get you to an emergency room," he said, his face pale with shock and anger. Those are serious burns. As we emerged from the bathroom, most guests were already gathering their things to leave the celebration effectively over. Diana stood in the center of the room, still attempting to maintain the fiction that it had been an accident. She bumped my arm. She was telling a skeptical-looking cousin. I would never intentionally... Her words trailed off as she saw us. James walked right past her, without acknowledgement, his arm protectively around me. Only at the door did he turn back to his mother. "Don't call us," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Don't come to our house. What you did tonight was unforgivable." The drive to the emergency room passed in a blur of pain and shock. As doctors treated my second-degree burns, applying ointments and bandages, I realized that something fundamental had changed. The careful facade of family harmony had been shattered beyond repair, and none of us could go back to pretending everything was fine. In the sterile hospital room, as James held my hand and apologized repeatedly for his mother's behavior, I knew our marriage had reached a critical turning point. Whatever happened next would define our future, both as a couple and as part of the Thompson family. The next morning, I couldn't face returning to the house James and I shared so close to his parents' home. Every movement was painful as the burns on my thighs and stomach made themselves known. The hospital had given me pain medication and burn cream, along with instructions to watch for signs of infection. "I'll stay at Rachel's for a few days," I told James as we left the hospital. "I need some space to process what happened." James looked devastated but didn't argue. "I understand," he said quietly. "But please know I'm so sorry, Stella. What my mother did was inexcusable. I should have protected you better all these years." Rachel welcomed me with open arms, setting up her guest room with extra pillows and a mini fridge stocked with water and snacks so I wouldn't have to move around too much. As I settled in, the emotional weight of what had happened finally hit me and I broke down in tears. "I don't know what to do," I sobbed as Rachel sat beside me. "I love James, but I can't live like this anymore. His mother literally assaulted me in front of everyone." "You don't have to decide anything right now," Rachel assured me. "Just focus on healing both physically and emotionally." Over the next few days, my phone flooded with messages from James's family members who had witnessed the incident. Most expressed shock and sympathy, though a few of Diana's more loyal defenders suggested I might have provoked her in some way. James called multiple times daily, his voice increasingly desperate, as I maintained my need for space. "She's been calling me constantly," he admitted during one conversation. "She keeps saying it was an accident and everyone is overreacting. Do you believe it was an accident?" I asked, holding my breath for his answer. There was a long pause before he sighed. "No, I saw her face, Stella. She meant to hurt you." While staying at Rachel's, I made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Lisa Bennett helped me understand the dynamics that had been at play in my relationship with Diana. "What you're describing sounds like a classic narcissistic parent-in-law situation," she explained during our second session. "Diana sees you as a threat to her relationship with her son. Every success you have, every bond you form with James, diminishes her sense of control and importance." "But why would she go so far as to physically hurt me?" I asked. "When narcissists feel their control slipping, they can resort to extreme measures," Dr. Bennett said. "The public revelation about your fertility issues threatened her narrative that you were selfishly choosing career over family. When she couldn't control the situation verbally, she escalated to physical action. These insights helped me understand what had been happening, but they didn't make the decision about my marriage any easier. I loved James deeply, but his inability to set boundaries with his mother had enabled years of emotional abuse that culminated in physical injury. Meanwhile, James was having his own reckoning. He visited me at Rachel's on the 5th day, bringing fresh flowers and my favorite takeout food. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said as we sat in Rachel's living room, "and I need to apologize for more than just what happened at the anniversary dinner. I've been making excuses for my mother's behavior toward you since we first started dating. I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, or that you were being too sensitive, because facing the truth meant confronting my mother and potentially damaging our relationship." "Why was that so scary for you?" I asked, genuinely wanting to understand. James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he made when deeply troubled. "I've always been the peacekeeper in my family. Mum has always been difficult, and Dad copes by retreating. I learned early on that keeping Mum happy was my responsibility." His voice broke slightly. "But in trying to keep peace with her, I betrayed you, the person I love most in the world." His sincerity was evident, but I remained cautious. What happens now? She's still your mother. She lives 15 minutes away. We can't just pretend she doesn't exist. I don't expect you to pretend anything, James said firmly. I've told my mother she's not welcome in our home until she takes responsibility for her actions and makes a genuine apology to you. I've also told her I'm taking a break from contact with her while I figure things out. I was surprised by his decisiveness. How did she take that? Not well? He admitted. There were tears, accusations that you've turned me against her, threats to cut me off financially. The whole narcissistic playbook, as my new therapist calls it. You're seeing a therapist. This was unexpected. James nodded. Dr. Richards specializes in adult children of narcissistic parents. I've had 3 emergency sessions already. He's helping me see patterns I never recognized before. Over the next week, James and I continued our separate therapy sessions while having careful conversations about our future. Diana made several attempts to bypass James's boundaries, showing up at our house, sending flying monkeys in the form of relatives to plead her case, even calling my office once, though my assistant fortunately screened the call. 2 weeks after the incident, I agreed to return home with conditions. James and I would start couples therapy in addition to our individual sessions. We would maintain firm boundaries with Diana, including no visits without prior agreement from both of us. And James would need to consistently stand up for me when necessary. Our first couples session with Dr. Melissa Wong was intense but productive. She helped us identify the patterns that had damaged our marriage and develop strategies for moving forward united. The 2 of you against the problem, not against each other, she reminded us. And right now the problem is establishing healthy boundaries with Diana while rebuilding trust between you. As my burns healed, leaving faint scars that would fade with time, I felt my emotional strength returning as well. The incident, horrible as it was, had forced issues into the open that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. James was finally seeing his mother clearly, without the filter of childhood conditioning and obligation. Diana, however, continued to resist accountability. Her version of an apology came via a text message. I'm sorry you made me so angry that I reacted poorly. We should put this unfortunate incident behind us for James's sake. I showed the message to James, who read it with a grim expression. That's not an apology, that's blame shifting and rug sweeping. His recognition of these tactics, terms he had learned in therapy, showed me how seriously he was taking our situation. Together, we drafted a response, making it clear that a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and commitment to changed behavior would be necessary before any relationship could be rebuilt. Diana's response was to rally family members to her cause. Some relatives who hadn't witnessed the soup incident were told a highly edited version that cast Diana as the victim of my ongoing attempts to separate James from his family. Others who had seen what happened were pressured to keep peace in the family by encouraging us to forgive and forget. The stress began affecting my work performance. I found it difficult to concentrate on marketing campaigns when my personal life was in such turmoil. My boss noticed and called me into her office one afternoon. Stella, you've always been one of our strongest team members, she said kindly, but it's clear something's going on. Is there anything I can do to help? Her compassion broke through my professional facade, and I found myself explaining the situation through tears. To my surprise, she was incredibly supportive, sharing that she had experienced similar in-law problems early in her own marriage. Take the time you need, she advised. Your projects can be covered temporarily. Focus on healing your marriage and yourself. During this difficult period, I reconnected with my own family, who provided the unconditional support I desperately needed. My parents came to stay for a week, cooking meals, helping around the house, and offering the kind of loving presence that highlighted just how dysfunctional Diana's version of family love truly was. As weeks passed, James and I slowly rebuilt our connection through honest conversations and consistent actions. He maintained his boundaries with Diana, despite her escalating attempts to regain control, from claiming health emergencies to threatening to rewrite her will. In therapy, I began exploring why I had tolerated Diana's behavior for so long. Dr. Bennett helped me recognize patterns from my own childhood, a tendency to seek approval from authority figures, and difficulty standing up for myself when criticized. You've been trained to be a peacekeeper too, she pointed out. You and James both need to recognize that true peace doesn't come from appeasing toxic behavior. It comes from establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries. This insight was transformative. I had spent years trying to win Diana's approval, believing that if I was just perfect enough, the perfect wife, daughter-in-law, career woman, housekeeper, she would finally accept me. Recognizing the futility of this approach was both liberating and sad. I began researching toxic mother-in-law relationships and narcissistic personality traits, finding community in online support groups with others experiencing similar situations. The validation that I wasn't alone, wasn't crazy, and wasn't responsible for Diana's behavior gave me strength. 3 months after the soup incident, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The physical scars were fading, but more importantly, I saw a strength in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I was no longer willing to be a victim in my own life story. It was time to take control of the situation, rather than simply reacting to Diana's provocations. With support from our therapists, James and I developed a strategy to address the situation with Diana directly, rather than continuing the cycle of attack and withdrawal. We needed closure one way or another to move forward with our lives. I spent weeks documenting Diana's pattern of behavior, creating a timeline of specific incidents from our first meeting through the anniversary dinner disaster. The process was painful, but clarifying, revealing just how systematic her undermining had been. Dr. Wong helped us practice assertive communication techniques, role-playing difficult conversations so we could prepare for Diana's likely reactions: denial, blame-shifting, tears, or rage. James, in particular, needed to prepare for his mother's emotional manipulation tactics that had worked on him since childhood. The key, Dr. Wong emphasized, is to stay calm, stick to the facts, and be united in your boundaries. Remember that you're not responsible for her emotions or reactions. Before confronting Diana, James and I needed to have our own difficult conversation about his enabling behavior. One evening, after a particularly intense therapy session, we sat in our living room, with cups of tea, facing the hardest truths of our marriage. "I need you to understand something, James," I began carefully. "I love you deeply, but I can't continue in this marriage if things don't change with your mother. Not because I don't want to be with you, but because the current situation is destroying me." James nodded slowly, pain evident in his eyes. "I understand, and you deserve better than what I've given you." Dr. Richards helped me see how I've been conditioned to prioritize my mother's feelings above everyone else's, even my own, even yours. "Why do you think that happened?" I asked, genuinely curious about his insight. He sighed deeply. "Growing up, my mother's moods dictated the atmosphere in our entire house. When she was happy, everything was wonderful. When she was upset, it was like living in a minefield. I learned that keeping her happy was my job, that her emotional state was somehow my responsibility." As he continued explaining his childhood experiences, I began to understand the enormous pressure he had been under his entire life. Diana had systematically trained him to be her emotional caretaker, punishing any signs of independence or boundary setting with withdrawal of affection or explosive anger. "I'm not making excuses," James said firmly. "I'm a grown man and I should have protected you. I'm just trying to explain why it's been so difficult for me to stand up to her. But I'm committed to changing that pattern. You are my priority now, Stella. You're my family." This conversation marked a turning point in our approach. James was no longer wavering between loyalty to his mother and loyalty to me. He had made his choice, and that clarity gave us both strength for what came next. We arranged for a meeting with Diana and George at a neutral location, a private room at a local restaurant where we could speak freely without being in either of our territories. Diana initially refused to attend, but George, who had been increasingly supportive of our boundaries since the soup incident, convinced her it was necessary. On the morning of the meeting, I was extremely anxious. James and I had prepared extensively, but confronting Diana's behavior directly felt like walking into a lion's den. We arrived early to settle our nerves and review our talking points. When Diana and George entered, the contrast between them was striking. George looked tired but determined, while Diana was immaculately dressed and composed, clearly prepared to defend herself. She attempted to kiss James's cheek, pointedly ignoring me, but he stepped back. "Let's sit down," he said firmly. "We have a lot to discuss." Once seated, Diana immediately took control of the narrative. "I'm so glad we're finally putting this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us," she began with a practiced smile. "Family is too important to let one little incident create such division." "Mom," James interrupted, his voice steady, "this isn't about one incident. This is about a pattern of behavior that has been harmful to Stella and to our marriage." Diana's smile faltered slightly. "I don't know what you mean. I've always welcomed Stella into our family despite her differences from what we expected for you." I took a deep breath and placed the folder containing my documentation on the table. Diana, we've made a record of your behavior toward me over the past 6 years. Specific incidents, witnesses, dates. We're not here to argue about whether these things happened. We're here to discuss how we move forward. Diana's face flushed with anger. You've been keeping a file on me, like I'm some kind of criminal. This is exactly the kind of calculating behavior I've warned James about. George placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Diana, please listen. I was there for many of these incidents. They happened just as they've described. Diana looked at her husband in shock, clearly unprepared for him to side against her. This momentary destabilization gave James the opportunity to continue. Mum, we love you, he said gently, but your treatment of Stella has been unacceptable. The comments about her family, her career, our fertility struggles, and then physically assaulting her at your anniversary dinner. That crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. It was an accident, Diana insisted, though her protest lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and played a video one of James's cousins had secretly recorded at the dinner, clearly showing Diana's deliberate actions and her words before the soup incident. Diana watched in horror, perhaps seeing herself objectively for the first time. I was upset, she stammered. Stella has been taking you away from me since you met her. No, Mom, James said firmly. I'm an adult who fell in love and got married. That's normal and healthy. Your inability to accept that isn't Stella's fault. For the next hour, we methodically addressed specific incidents and patterns, refusing to be derailed by Diana's attempts to change the subject, play the victim, or minimize her actions. George, to his credit, gently kept her engaged when she threatened to leave. Finally, James laid out our boundaries clearly. Moving forward, here's what needs to happen. First, you need to take responsibility for your behavior and offer Stella a genuine apology. Not, I'm sorry if you were offended, or I'm sorry but you provoked me. Second, you'll respect our boundaries as a couple. No unannounced visits, no criticism of Stella, no interference in our marriage. Third, if you want a relationship with us, you'll need to start therapy to address these patterns. Diana's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a calculating look I recognized all too well. And if I don't agree to these demands? She asked coolly. James took my hand before answering. Then we'll need to take a complete break from our relationship with you until you're ready to respect these boundaries. I don't want that, Mum. I love you, but I won't allow Stella to be treated this way anymore. Diana turned to George, clearly expecting him to intervene on her behalf. Instead, he nodded slowly. They're being reasonable, Diana. What happened at the dinner was inexcusable. We almost lost our son because of it. Diana's composure finally cracked. You're all ganging up on me, she cried, tears flowing. After everything I've sacrificed for this family. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the restaurant. George looked at us apologetically. She needs time to process. This is the first time anyone has really held her accountable. I should have done it years ago. As we watched George follow Diana out, James and I sat in silence, emotionally exhausted, but also relieved. We had said our piece without being manipulated or divided. Whatever happened next, we had taken a stand together. Are you okay? James asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded slowly. I am. For the first time in years, I actually am. We might not have changed her, but we've changed how we respond to her. That's what matters. As we drove home, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we had taken the first crucial step toward healing our marriage and establishing the healthy boundaries we should have set years ago. In the weeks following our confrontation with Diana, we experienced what our therapist called an extinction burst, a dramatic escalation of problematic behavior before potential improvement. Diana cycled through various tactics to regain control and access to James. First came the flying monkeys, relatives and family friends calling to tell us we were being too harsh, that Diana was devastated by our treatment. Next came guilt-inducing emails about how much she had sacrificed for James throughout his life. When those tactics failed, she tried showing up at our house unannounced, forcing us to reinforce our boundary by not opening the door. James remained remarkably steady through these tests, checking in with his therapist regularly and maintaining our united front. His resolve strengthened my own, and together we weathered the storm of Diana's escalating attempts to break our boundaries. It's like withdrawal, Dr. Richards explained during a joint session with our therapists. Diana is accustomed to getting her narcissistic supply from controlling James and belittling Stella. When that supply is cut off, she'll try increasingly desperate measures to restore it. Meanwhile, our marriage was healing. Without the constant stress of Diana's interference, We rediscovered the connection that had brought us together initially. We began having date nights again, planning a delayed anniversary trip, and even tentatively discussing our options for building a family through adoption or fertility treatments. 3 weeks after our confrontation, everything changed when George suffered a minor heart attack. Despite our boundaries with Diana, there was no question of not going to the hospital to support James's father. When we arrived at the cardiac care unit, Diana was already there, pacing anxiously. Her face hardened when she saw me enter with James, but the hospital setting forced a civil interaction. "They're running tests," she informed James pointedly, speaking as if I weren't present. "The doctor said it was mild, but at his age, any heart issue is serious." James nodded, putting his arm around me in a silent message of unity. "We'll wait with you, Mom. Stella and I both care deeply about Dad." Diana's lips tightened, but she said nothing more as we settled into the waiting area. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by occasional updates from nursing staff. Finally, the cardiologist emerged with news that George was stable and would recover with medication and lifestyle changes. "Family can see him now, but only 2 at a time, please," the doctor advised. Diana immediately stood. "James, come with me." "Stella is family too, Mum," James said firmly. "Why don't you go first, and then Stella and I will go together?" Diana looked like she wanted to argue, but was too aware of the public setting. She nodded stiffly and followed the doctor to George's room. When our turn came, George looked pale but alert, various monitors beeping softly around him. His face brightened when he saw both of us enter. "There's my son and daughter," he said warmly, reaching for our hands. His deliberate inclusion of me as his daughter brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Throughout the years of tension with Diana, George had always been kind, if somewhat passive. This explicit acknowledgement of our family bond felt significant. We chatted quietly about his condition and the doctor's recommendations for recovery. As we were preparing to leave, George held onto my hand a moment longer. "Stella," he said softly, "I want to apologize for not stepping in sooner. I've allowed Diana's behavior toward you for too long, making excuses instead of addressing the real issues. That stops now." I squeezed his hand, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, George. Your health is what matters right now. We can talk more when you're stronger." As we left the room, I noticed Diana standing just outside the door, her expression suggesting she had overheard George's apology. For the first time, I saw something beyond anger or manipulation in her eyes, perhaps a flicker of genuine reflection. George's doctor recommended family counseling to reduce stress during his recovery, pointing out that emotional tension could exacerbate heart conditions. To our surprise, Diana agreed, though she framed it as something she was doing solely for George's benefit. The first family therapy session was awkward and tense, with Diana participating minimally. The therapist, Dr. Patel, was skilled at navigating family dynamics and gently but firmly kept Diana engaged when she attempted to withdraw or redirect. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Patel said, during one particularly difficult moment, "I notice you become defensive when James expresses how certain interactions affected him. Can you help me understand what you're feeling in those moments?" Diana's initial response was dismissive. "I'm feeling that my son has been influenced to reinterpret normal maternal concern as something negative." Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. "That must be painful feeling misunderstood in your intentions. I wonder, though, if we could explore the possibility that impact sometimes differs from intent." This gentle reframing slowly began to create cracks in Diana's defensive armor. She wasn't suddenly transformed, but small moments of genuine reflection began to emerge between her more typical narcissistic responses. Throughout these sessions, I maintained firm boundaries while trying to approach Diana with compassion rather than resentment. This wasn't easy, especially when she would make subtle digs or attempt to rewrite history. But I recognized that maintaining my own integrity was more important than winning each skirmish. James grew stronger in his ability to identify and counter his mother's manipulations without becoming angry or defensive. In one particularly powerful session, he calmly told Diana, "Mum, I love you, but when you say things like that, you're asking me to choose between you and my wife. I won't do that anymore. We're a package deal." The breakthrough came during our 5th family session when Dr. Patel guided us through an exercise about fears and insecurities. When it was Diana's turn, she initially resisted, but George's gentle encouragement finally broke through her defenses. "Fine," she said, voice tight with emotion. "My fear is that I'm losing my son, that I'm being replaced and forgotten, that after everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, I'll end up alone and unimportant." The raw vulnerability in her admission silenced the room. Dr. Patel nodded encouragingly. Thank you for that honesty, Diana. That's a very human fear. James leaned forward, speaking gently to his mother. Mum, you're not losing me. You're gaining a daughter in Stella if you'll let yourself. Our relationship is changing, not ending. But it has to be based on mutual respect. Diana dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I don't know how to do this differently. This is how my mother was with me, how I've always been. That's why we're here, Dr. Patel said kindly, to learn new patterns that serve your relationships better. For the first time, Diana nodded without argument or deflection. Progress after this breakthrough was not linear. Diana would have moments of genuine connection, followed by retreats into old behaviours when she felt vulnerable. But the direction was consistently toward improvement, however halting. As George recovered and our relationship slowly healed, James and I found ourselves reconnecting in ways that had been impossible under the shadow of family conflict. The intimacy and trust between us deepened as we navigated these challenges together rather than being divided by them. My career rebounded as my emotional health improved. I received a promotion to Executive Director of Client Services, a role that allowed me to shape the agency's approach to client relationships. James fully celebrated this achievement, organising a surprise dinner with friends to honour my hard work. 6 months after the soup incident, we began seriously discussing our family building options again. After consulting with fertility specialists and adoption agencies, we decided to pursue adoption while continuing to try one round of IVF. When we cautiously shared this decision with Diana and George during a family dinner at a restaurant, not their home, Diana surprised us with her response. I have a friend on the board of a private adoption agency, she offered tentatively. Would it be helpful if I introduced you? No pressure, of course. The offer, made without conditions or criticism, felt like a genuine attempt to support our decision. James and I exchanged glances before I answered. That would be very kind, Diana. Thank you. It was a small moment, but significant in its simplicity. An interaction unmarred by manipulation or hidden agendas. Just a mother-in-law offering practical help without trying to control the outcome. It gave me hope that perhaps with continued effort on all sides, we might eventually build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than power struggles. As we drove home that evening, James reached for my hand. Thank you for not giving up on us, he said softly. On all of us. I squeezed his hand in return. Some things are worth fighting for. We are worth fighting for. In that moment, I realized how far we had come from the humiliating, painful night when Diana had called me a parasite and thrown soup on me. That incident, terrible as it was, had forced us to confront issues that might otherwise have poisoned our marriage slowly over decades. Sometimes it takes a dramatic breaking point to create space for genuine healing. 1 year after the infamous soup incident, James and I hosted a small dinner party at our home to celebrate several milestones: my complete recovery from the burns, George's improved health, our successful adoption of a beautiful baby girl named Lily, and most surprisingly, the gradual transformation in our family dynamics. As I put the finishing touches on our dinner table, I reflected on how much had changed. The most visible change was our family's newest addition, 4-month-old Lily sleeping peacefully in her nursery upstairs. After a difficult adoption process, we had been matched with her birth mother just 3 months earlier. The moment we held her in our arms, we knew our family was complete. Diana's reaction to becoming a grandmother had been another revelation. Instead of the controlling behaviour I had feared, she had approached her new role with unexpected humility, always asking before offering advice or assistance with Lily. The therapy sessions had clearly made an impact, though she still had moments of reverting to old patterns when stressed. The doorbell rang, announcing our first guests. Rachel and her husband David arrived bearing flowers and baby gifts, followed shortly by my parents. The last to arrive were Diana and George, looking relaxed and bearing a homemade dessert. I made that apple tart you mentioned liking, Diana said as she handed me the carefully wrapped dish. The recipe is included if you'd like to make it yourself sometime. This simple acknowledgement of my autonomy, offering the recipe rather than assuming I needed her to make it for me, represented significant growth from where we had been a year ago. As we settled around the table, George raised his glass in a toast. To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build together. The conversation flowed easily, touching on work projects, community events, and of course baby Lily's latest developments. When she woke from her nap, Diana waited to be invited before reaching for her granddaughter, a boundary respect that would have been unimaginable before. After dinner, while others were distracted with coffee and dessert, Diana approached me in the kitchen where I was preparing Lily's bottle. "Stella," she said hesitantly, I've been wanting to find the right moment to say something important. She took a deep breath. I am truly sorry for what happened at our anniversary dinner. Not just the soup incident, but for all the ways I've made you feel unwelcome over the years. I paused, recognizing the significance of this moment. Diana had made smaller apologies during our therapy sessions, but nothing this direct and unprompted. What I did was inexcusable, she continued when I didn't immediately respond. I was so afraid of losing my place in James's life that I tried to push you out of it. It was wrong, and I'm deeply ashamed of my behavior. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the calculated manipulation I had grown accustomed to. This was genuine remorse. Thank you, Diana, I said softly. That means a lot to me. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, she added. I know I've damaged our relationship in ways that can't be quickly repaired. But I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better. For James, for Lily, for you, and for myself. As I looked at my mother-in-law, this woman who had caused me so much pain but was now making a genuine effort to change, I felt something shift inside me. Not complete forgiveness, perhaps, but a willingness to move forward without carrying the weight of resentment. I appreciate that, I said honestly, and I think we're already on a better path. Diana smiled tentatively, then noticed Lily starting to fuss. May I hold her while you finish the bottle? Of course, I said carefully, transferring my daughter to her grandmother's arms. Watching Diana gently soothe Lily, I reflected on our journey. The scars from my burns had faded to almost nothing visible, only if you knew exactly where to look. The emotional scars were similar, still present, but no longer raw and painful. They had become part of my story, reminders of what I had survived and overcome. In the months following our adoption of Lily, our family dynamics continued to evolve in positive ways. Diana found healthy outlets for her need to be needed. Volunteering at a local senior centre and taking art classes she had always been interested in but never pursued. George became more assertive in their relationship, creating a healthier balance that benefited everyone. James and I established new traditions that respected everyone's boundaries. Sunday brunches instead of formal dinners, holidays that rotated between different homes rather than always deferring to Diana's planning. The difference in atmosphere was remarkable. Relaxed, genuine connection instead of walking on eggshells. My experience also led me to become a resource for others facing similar in-law challenges. I started an online support group that quickly grew to over 100 members, all navigating complicated family dynamics. Sharing my story and the strategies that had helped us heal became a way to transform my pain into something meaningful. The most profound change, however, was within myself. The woman who had once desperately sought Diana's approval, who had swallowed insults and endured boundary violations to keep peace, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that respect was a necessary foundation for any healthy relationship. I learnt that setting boundaries wasn't selfish or divisive. It was essential for authentic connection. I discovered that standing up for myself didn't have to mean cutting people off completely, but it did mean being clear about what treatment I would and wouldn't accept. Perhaps most importantly, I realized that some people may never fully change, but they can be taught how to interact with you in healthier ways. Diana still had narcissistic tendencies, still occasionally tested boundaries, still sometimes said thoughtless things. But she had learned that those behaviors had consequences, and she made genuine efforts to catch herself when falling into old patterns. As I watched my extended family laughing together in my living room, James bouncing Lily on his knee, my parents chatting amicably with Rachel sharing photos from her recent vacation, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had all grown stronger through adversity. The journey from victim to advocate, from peacekeeper to boundary setter, from insecurity to confidence, had been difficult but transformative. By refusing to accept disrespect and standing firm in my worth, I had not only changed my own life, but helped create space for everyone in our family to develop healthier relationships. What would you do if someone in your family crossed a line like my mother-in-law did? Would you have the courage to stand up for yourself, even if it meant risking relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect in their relationships too. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, setting boundaries isn't just an act of self-protection, it's an act of self-love.